SpotlightOnPodcast.com/store is the place to go to get a Spotlight On collectible for the music and arts lover in your life, or maybe even yourself. Go to SpotlightOnPodcast.com/store today. Hello and welcome to Spotlight On, the podcast featuring musicians, writers, innovators, and ideas shaping media, entertainment, and culture. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today, the spotlight shines on Danish organist Anders Koppel. Great music often runs in the family, and as proof, we have our first father-son episodes of Spotlight On. Last November, we had on Benjamin Koppel, son and collaborator of today's guest. But today's story starts decades ago, when Anders played Newport with his band Savage Rose. Fast forward to now, and Anders is back at the Hammond B3, making magic with Benjamin on alto sax and the incredible Brian Blade on drums. Their trio came together naturally. Benjamin and Brian have been close friends and collaborators since 2011. When they invited Anders to join them on organ, something special clicked. Their latest album, Time Again, swings hard while aiming for the heart. I'm so grateful to bring you Anders Koppel.
Hi, Lawrence.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm quite well, thank you.
It's good to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. Where are you?
I'm on a little island in north of Denmark where we have our summer house. I have been here since I was a child, so actually it feels like home. But of course, I live in Copenhagen usually.
Oh, that's wonderful. What's it like when you need to leave the island to go to a jazz festival or to do some work? Is it a chore to get back and forth?
No, actually, I work up here too.
Ah.
I compose, so I use the peacefulness to have new ideas. And it takes some time going to Copenhagen, 7 hours.
Wow.
I know. In America. Yeah.
I always think that the challenge when I speak with someone who has had the career longevity, the musical and artistic output, and just the range of musics that you've been involved with, I always find the challenge being how to rein it in. But I think a lot of your recent activity is actually making that easy for me because you have so much going on currently and even coming up later this year that I'm really excited to spend some time in the here and now with you. Over the last couple of days, I've been very much immersed in the Time Again record. Just such a beautiful work.
Thank you.
Something that struck me about it when I was able to give it a really close listen as opposed to having it on while I was doing other things was that the format itself, the trio format, as well as the way it was recorded, really lent itself to listening to your pedal work.
Yeah. What's you hear that?
Very, I guess I was going to use the word surprising. I don't mean that I'm surprised you're capable of it. Just so delicate, yet also prominent and propulsive. Could you tell me a little bit about your history with that instrument? Like coming up in a household that was so musically influenced, obviously, and with a classical tradition and a composer father. Just curious how you managed to find yourself seated at a B3 and what that journey was like.
That's a long story, of course. My father had a record collection of 78s from the 30s with Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Fletcher Henderson, and all of these, Art Tatum, and that was a big influence on me. I listened to the records over and over again.
Mm.
When I was maybe my 14th birthday or something like that, when I was a young guy, I had as birthday present Fats Waller playing the London Palladium organ. And that was a revelation for me because he played it not so much, of course it was jazz, but it was symphonic jazz. He played it like a symphony orchestra. And immediately I knew that's what I want. I got a very cheap Italian Farfisa organ and gradually I got another smaller Hammond. And we started the group, me and my brother, who played the piano, the Savage Rose in 67. And around 69, I got the B3. Because at that time, we had reduced the group to a trio, me, my brother, and he said the vocalist. So I needed to play the bass because we had no bass player. I got the B3 with a 2-octave pedal work, and I started practicing. I really love playing the pedals now you mention it, because for me the bass is maybe the heart of the music, keeps everything together and points the direction, actually the core of the music. So ever since that, I love playing the bass. That makes the instrument complete for me.
Mm.
Of course, I play with bass players from time to time. I play several times with Scott Colley, for instance, and that's a whole different thing. That's wonderful as well. Maybe it liberates me because I don't have the duty of keeping everything together in the bass and so on. But for me, the instrument only complete with the bass. And maybe the Fats record also sort of inspired my way of playing the organ, I think. Of course, I'm a big fan of Jimmy Smith and all of these great jazz organ players.
Mm.
But I'm in different direction. For me, it's a more symphonic thing.
How does that contrast with a Jimmy Smith or a Groove Holmes? Like when you say symphonic, what does that imply versus what they're doing?
Maybe it implies a bit more curiosity in the sound, because the Hammond organ can be like a flute, like a cello. It has so many different colors. And Jimmy Smith usually plays with one setting, more or less. I'm especially a big fan of his ballad playing, because I think in his ballad playing, there's much more liberated in sound.
Yeah.
He listens to the sound in a whole different way in the up-tempo thing, which he, of course, masters fantastically. But his ballad playing is exquisite.
It's really interesting to hear you say some of this because it's filling in some pieces for me as a listener. Again, to reference time again, there is an element to the playing, and part of it also is Brian Blade. He's such a soulful drummer, and leaves so much space for interplay and dialogue. Well, I think another thing that struck me about the organ playing was, the organ has a tendency to really cut through. It can hit a certain treble, or it just has a shrillness to it that is actually a really neat attribute when you're soloing or comping. But there's more of a textural element here in what you're doing. And I think the piece that's falling in for me is this idea that you've played in a lot of smaller ensembles where the organ did have to be sort of a glue.
I played in a trio called Bazaar for 36 years. Unfortunately, my two pals in the band has gone. That was the wind blower was playing bassoon, electrical bassoon, and clarinet, and then a percussionist. And of course, that left me alone with harmony.
Oh, interesting.
With everything, actually. And also, I played with Benjamin for many years, with a percussionist who's unfortunately also gone now. But with Brian, we have been playing many times for several years. Actually, every time he was in Denmark, we have had some gigs. And of course, it's such big inspiration to play with Brian because he's a genius, wonderful musician, and such a wonderful man. And the thing with Brian is he's so easy to play with because he catches everything you do. He justifies everything you do, but he never stresses that he hears everything. He fills in, he makes everything natural. He develops music in a very organic way. That suits me, of course, well, as it does so many other.
I love watching him play. Anytime I can see him live, just the physicality and sort of the way he moves the music and the instrument. It's incredible.
It's pure joy. He loves music so much. We had a very fantastic cooperation around the Mulberry Street Symphony, which is a big work in 90 minutes of music for a trio, namely Benjamin on alto sax, Scott Colley on bass, and Brian on drums, and symphony orchestra, which I composed especially for this trio. And Brian doesn't play with a symphony orchestra every day, but in that situation, actually, I didn't write anything for him. I made him a transcript for piano of the orchestra parts, and he followed that, and he filled in as he knew the music inside out. That was very fruitful, and then we made time again, a couple of years, maybe a year after, and that's wonderful.
It's funny, as you were speaking earlier, I was thinking about the first time I sat at a B3 many, many years ago in a recording studio. And I remember thinking, how does one person do this? Like, it seems like it would take 6 people between the draws and the pedals and the stacked keyboards and the Leslie control. It's a daunting instrument. I'm curious, is there still room to explore? Or, how do you think about mastery versus curiosity?
To me, it's no different than a drummer. The drummer has a bass drum, he has a snare, he has cymbals, he has toms, and so on. And for a real drummer, it's not drums, it's music. It's really one thing. And for me, the organ is one thing. And I don't think about the bass as such. It grows naturally from the music,
And I think I'm curious about the idea that because it's such a potentially complex instrument in terms of combinations of elements that you can control, if you feel as though you've exhausted the possibilities or you've mastered the instrument, is there an excitement or a sense of opportunity that you can learn new things?
Always. I mean, it's no different than the piano.
Yeah.
Because the organ is such a rich instrument, but so is the piano. And there are seemingly not so many possibilities as such on a piano, but the possibilities are endless, even on a piano, because once you get into the sound, the soulfulness of music, you don't think about possibilities or you just want to sing. You know what I mean? It's not to make a mystery out of it, but I really feel like that. And also, I will say that the sound possibilities are, of course, endless in a Hammond organ.
Yeah.
And I find that from time to time, my focus shifts. I sort of discover new or old sounds that I have been into for some years, and wow, this I want to use again. And so it's a continuous development, really.
Did you spend much time either on record or just as a personal pursuit exploring synthesizers? Were synthesizers ever a big part of your creativity?
As a composer, yes, because for many years I made a lot of film music and also ballet music and music for theaters, and I used extensively synthesizers and samplers and so on. But I never took them on stage because for me it's a different thing. It's part of composing, but not part of playing. For me, as a musician, I have the piano and I have the organ. I never had the urge to bring the synthesizer on stage for some reason.
So as a composer, it was a method for you to be able to hear, to emulate some of the sound or to take what was in your head and hear it before you actually had the luxury of live musicians?
Yeah, sometimes like that, but also just to discover new sounds, new inspiration, new textures and so on. And at that time in the 80s, when you played a synthesizer, you felt like you were part of a journey, a discovery journey. So you were really exploring new fields. Now maybe it's a different thing because everything has been discovered.
I'm very curious about the musical relationship with Benjamin. It's funny to talk to you now because I spent some time with him about a year ago. And I'm realizing as we speak that there's a trait or multiple traits the two of you share in common. One is there's a lightness and a humor that you both seem to share while still being very serious about the music itself.
Yeah.
You used the word earlier, soulfulness or soul and soulful. I feel and hear that element in his music as well. And in talking with him, in fact, it might be the dominant word outside of humor that came up for me when I left my conversation with him. I know it's a bit of an ineffable quality. They're both emotional resonances, humor and soul. And I'm curious, do you have a sense how you came into having that personality? You know, was it from having an artistic family or growing up with an artistic parent? What is this sense of heart that you have?
Yeah, that's a big question. When I look back on my life, I know I got a lot from my father because for him, music was a very serious matter. If you devoted yourself to music, there was no shortcuts. You really had to go all the way. Either you were a composer or as a pianist. He was himself both a pianist and composer. And so from him, I learned, I think, to work hard, which Benjamin, I think, maybe has learned from me. The basis of what you talk about, the lightness, the humor, the soul, and so on, comes from devoting your life to music, and it doesn't come free. If you want to reach out to other people, if you want to express your own soul, you have to master your instrument. Benjamin is really a virtuoso. I mean, he really can play anything. I know he worked hard, and I know I worked hard. Also as a composer, because that's a machinery too. You have to oil and maintain and develop, So the basis I learned from my father, but also I learned from my relationship with the musicians I worked with, of course, all the time, from Benjamin, because we have been playing together ever since he was always, actually, because when he was a little boy, when the rest of the family were out of the house, we made songs together, which we recorded in the studio. And he wrote the lyrics. I made the tunes, and he had a wonderful singing voice when he was a child, almost a bit like Stevie Wonder, the boy. He had that kind of a voice. So we made a lot of music together, even when he was 6. And we just continued. Then he played drums, and then he took up saxophone. And when he took up saxophone, I took up the guitar, because I thought, if he could learn a new instrument, I can learn a new instrument. So I began studying guitar, and we, 3 weeks after, we went on a tour on Danish cafes and so on, playing together, guitar and sax.
Oh my goodness, that's beautiful.
And we have been playing together ever since. Part of our relationship is, of course, to give each other great opportunities, because he asked me, would you like to do that, this and that? And yeah, of course. And I write, I've written 5 saxophone concertos for him, concertos for saxophone and symphony orchestra. So we give each other opportunities and new ways of expression.
We'll be back with more Spotlight On and Anders Koppel right after this break.
Hey, this is Michael, producer of Spotlight On, and I'm here to tell you about a project Lawrence and I have been working on. It's called The Tone Arm, and it's an online magazine devoted to arts, music, culture, and people who make cool stuff. Those people are mostly musicians, but they're also artists, entrepreneurs in the arts, writers, and anyone else making our world a better and more interesting place to live in. You'll find expanded articles on our podcast guests, inspiring interviews with creative folks talking about their craft, fascinating perspective pieces from our team of writers, and the latest news and releases from the artists and musicians in our orbit. We're so proud of the Tone Arm, and we can't wait for you to check it out. It's thetonearm.com. And while you're there, become a free member of the Tone Arm and add us to your RSS reader. There's lots to come. That's thetonearm.com. The Tone Arm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.
And now, back to Spotlight On. While we're in this realm of relationships, something that I remember from my conversation with Benjamin was, him talking about the relationship that he and his family have with Brian and Brian's family, and just the closeness, and, they stay with each other. And obviously, when they're gigging, they're traveling together as musicians do.
Yeah.
I'm always curious, especially when it's with jazz musicians or creative music musicians, who often don't necessarily get to spend a lot of time together before they record and play. They have to come together, rehearse, and then do it, or sometimes not even rehearse.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm so interested in the contrast between people that are able, and ensembles that are able to either stay together for a long time or reconvene periodically. Basically, they get to have an ongoing relationship and dialogue versus one-off things that come together for maybe some sessions and some dates, and then they're both so interesting in those dynamics. But I'm curious about the specifics of the melding of the artistic and the family. I hear this a lot about the Everly Brothers or the Louvin Brothers. People would talk about how the brothers' voices melded, or even the Beach Boys. It seems to be a unique aspect of the vocal harmony when it's a brotherly or a familial bond. Is there an analog to that amongst instrumentalist musicians in terms of a family connection, or is that laying too much into it?
No, don't think we talked about it, but I know there is such a thing because I know Benjamin's sound, I know his intentions, I know his ways as he does with mine. So we know ahead of what is happening, where he's heading. But also I want to say that the whole family thing, also with players as Brian, or for instance, another very good friend of ours, Kenny Werner, the pianist, who we have such a wonderful relationship and has had for years, where I have made two records with it, 2 albums with him. Mm. For me, the relationship outside of the music is a wonderful entrance to the music. If you're brothers or fathers and sons or whatever, maybe there's a lot of things that are easier. If you love one another, actually, to say it as it is, love is a way of making music, I think.
Yeah.
The day before we made Time Again, recorded in one day in studio, the day before, me and my wife had our golden anniversary in America too, 50 years of marriage.
Wow.
And we had a big party, and Brian and his wife Laura was there. And just to show you that when we have the opportunity, they are part of the family.
Yeah.
So when we went into the studio next day, we went to the studio with a feeling of happiness because we had this wonderful party inside of us. And so the music became light and everything was easy. Every take on the record is a first take. We never went back and took it again.
That's incredible. And it saves on studio time.
Yeah. And when the day was over, I think we had 80 minutes of music or something. Not everything was on the album.
Did you share any kind of artistic life with your own father?
Yes, of course. When I was a child, I played piano, of course. Later on, I played clarinet. And so I also, when I was very small, played recorder. And he wrote several pieces for me and him for recorder and piano.
Wow.
Later on, he wrote for clarinet and piano, which we played in concerts. And I was maybe 14, 15 years old. We made a lot of things together. So we had a very fruitful artistic relationship too. And he was always very interested in what I was into. What did I listen to? And he wanted to, when I listened to Jimi Hendrix, for instance, he was always interested in what I was into, and vice versa, of course.
What did he think of that contemporary music? Did he like it? Did he find things that resonated for him?
As all, I think, true musicians, he didn't use the labels. For him, it was music. And the group that me and my brother, the Savage Rose, which I was maybe 17, 18 when we made that band, it was a huge success from the start on. And it was very interesting because it was a rock band, but it was a different kind of rock band because we carried the classical music with us, of course. It was a bit different harmonies. It was a different way of thinking music. And he understood that, of course. I only remember that he was very interested in all the new things coming out. Dylan, when I went into a Bob Dylan beer, he wanted, what is it you are so occupied with? And he listened to it and the band and, all of that.
That's amazing. Do you share that attribute? Do you find that you have a musical curiosity about, not even necessarily pop music, but do you still listen and consume newer music or do you have a canon that you revisit repeatedly? Like sort of how do you think about the ever expanding world of music?
Yeah. When I turned 50, I stopped making film music, ballet music and all of that. I wanted to concentrate on making scores, symphony orchestras, string quartets, everything, which really inspired me. When I started on doing that, I, of course, found out that it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
My time of catching up with new trends and so on, new music, is more limited now than when I was a young guy. I had a lot of time because we made an album from time to time and we're touring, but, new music, we wanted to hear everything. What can go into our music? And now it's more a question of pursuing my part, So I cannot say that I'm very much into the new trends. I hear things, of course, from time to time, but I'm in no way complete.
it's pretty much impossible to be these days. There's so much music. It's so exciting, but it's so daunting. I know I wake up every day and realize there's so much going on out there in subgenres and little micro scenes and regional things going on that I'll never know about it all.
I read the other day that every day 300,000 new songs are being put on Spotify and all of that.
Yeah.
300,000 songs.
Yeah. This point comes up a lot in this podcast and these discussions, but I see a lot of hand-wringing in the music industry and from industry commentators about how there's so much music and not a lot of it's good, and the streaming services are being inundated with all these amateurs uploading music. But that strikes me as a net positive for the world. My sort of pithy one-liner about it is that, of all the world's problems, I wouldn't put like too much artistic output in the top 5.
No, neither will I. No. But the thing is, the industry, as you say, is changing in a very rapid manner. So everything is different now than maybe 20 years ago. Everything is changing so fast, so quickly. Even that is hard to keep up with. So maybe that's the hand-wringing situation, because how do we orientate ourselves in a world that is changing so quickly as it is? Because even concerts is changing. When I was a young guy and we made our albums, we could go into the studio for a month and we could make these fantastic developed things as Beach Boys or the Beatles did, where we made, statements in the form of an album. And for us, and maybe for the rest of the world, try to make some new music, some real new music. Now that is impossible because you cannot make money out of making music in that way anymore. So everything is changing. And maybe I cannot say if it's for the better or for the worse. The world has always been changing, but it is changing in a very quick manner now.
Yeah.
No, I made an album with Kenny Werner and Benjamin once, and it was called Everything is Subject to Change. And that's truer now than ever.
Panga 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 Peka tibe gobi mama mani lado ni vini a juli bikini dada Idami te duluka amanakuchi amana Come against it Pang panga Let me switch over to the tongue Let me feed you with a trigger Let me turn around and give you that type of figure This is the Mobius loop with the jazzy troop And as we swoop down When I can look around rocking with the crown Let's bounce for the remedy The melody, the rhythm that be telling me Music is medicine for the soul Never felony, no felony. So let's just move on. Cause the man said it's time to groove on. This is that love that will rise above. Some of that thing that you got going over back to push and shove. One phone in to crack that dream now. All we got now is this team. Is the music.
One of the only developments of the last maybe 10 or 15 years that I think actually disturbs me, if that's the right word, is just all the new pressures on the artists themselves, especially younger artists who have, or even mid-career artists who have to learn a different sort of game than they thought they were getting into. The idea that everybody has to promote all the time and they have to make all this other sort of supporting video and audio and all the other work they have to do around the work. Now, no one actually has to do it. I'm probably not choosing my words well, but if you want to be in the competitive end of the spectrum, and it seems like there's so much more of a hustle that artists have to go through, and it doesn't seem fair to ask them to be digital marketers and amateur video producers. And my one lament would be if all that time that they're spending on that other stuff could just be about composing and arranging and being in the studio and performing. I would wish that for artists,
Yeah, and having the time to develop their instruments, to practice even.
Yeah.
You're completely right. There's a lot of distractions in a career, and you have to maintain a concentration on the important issues, which is the music, but maybe not so much now as it used to be. I can see that even in concerts, the audiences like more and more that not a concert as such, but an event, a complete event where the visuals are just as important as music, maybe even more so. I'm not into that ball game at all. And I have the right to not be in the ball game because I'm 77 years old. I think I will stick to my trade.
Hey, the Rolling Stones just finished a tour of stadiums here in America, and they've got a few years on you.
Yeah, I know. But same procedure as last year, right? Yeah.
Something that's definitely a hallmark of your career is this, I guess, transcending of genre or integration of genre. I don't know how to say it. I would say it's less a disregard for genre and more an integration of genre. Like you take from wherever inspiration strikes you. That's my impression. You're not limited.
I think maybe that your music reflects the music you had been into, of course. And I have been into a lot of different music in my life. I have been into Cuban music, in Turkish music, in jazz, of course, in classical music and whatever, African music, Brazil music. And so I have focused on a lot of things. And I think that everything is reflected in my music. And I think me and Benjamin are a bit like each other in that way too. We are not limited by what others call labels or genres. I'm into music. I remember I once saw an interview with Duke Ellington, and he's sitting at the piano, and he's asked a question by the television show, Mr. Ellington, what is jazz to you? And Ellington hits a wonderful Ellington-esque chord, a wonderful chord, and he says, yeah, I don't know about jazz. I know about music. Mm-hmm. And I have seen that he maintained that view always. It was not a smart remark on a television show. He really meant that he didn't care about jazz. He cared about music. And that is, of course, so wonderfully reflected in his music, which is, of course, open to inspirations, open to sound, open to new ways of doing things. Inspirations from everything, actually. I think Mr. Ellington was right in that respect, too. I feel the same way.
Did you ever see him perform?
Yes, I did. In the Tivoli Gardens concert hall. And he had some wonderful Scottish square trousers with green squares on. He was very sharp looking. And, of course, it was wonderful. Johnny Hodges was there. And, I mean, it was the band. I also saw him in '69 when my band, the Savage Rose, played the Newport Jazz Festival. He was there with his band, and I heard it, of course. He's always been one of the guys, one of the stars on the sky, of course.
Who else do you remember from that '69 lineup?
That was the year when the Newport Jazz Festival opened up to other genres.
Yeah.
So there was rock music there. There was soul music. James Brown. My band was scheduled to play after Sly and the Family Stone.
Wow.
Which kind of made me a little nervous because they always were and still are one of my favorite bands. I love them very, very much. It's so original, fantastic music. They really tore the place apart,
Yeah.
Everything was in riots after their show. And so luckily our performance was postponed to the next day.
Give everybody a chance to cool down a little bit.
Yeah. But they heard so many things there. James Brown, as I mentioned, everybody was there. It's fantastic.
That's an interesting era when the way the concert bills would get mixed back then, here in America, you had Bill Graham putting Miles Davis opening for the Grateful Dead or the Jefferson Airplane, or some of those rock bands would go to Europe and play on jazz festival lineups. Such an interesting time to illustrate that sort of comment you made, that from the musician's point of view, it makes sense to be in all those contexts and environments because they're all just playing music.
And Miles was inspired by Sly and the Family Stone and so on and so on.
Yeah.
So everything is mixed. Anyhow, so let's just keep it that way.
So you have some interesting projects coming up later this year, and I'm wondering, what is this interest in composing for military brass bands?
Yeah.
It seems to be
In the last year, I made 2 big pieces for military brass bands. I have done so earlier also. Actually, I love the sound, the homogeneity of the sound of the brass instruments. So in the autumn, I wrote a piece based on 7 poems written by children in Theresienstadt concentration camp during World War II.
Yeah.
It was a huge success, and now it will be played in the museum in Theresienstadt in Prague, Czechoslovakia. So that's very interesting. I find it inspirational to write for such homogenic ensembles as a military brass band, or I could say a string quartet. It's very easy to write good sounding music for. And the same goes for the brass band. So I love writing for that.
Yeah. There's something beautifully subversive and obviously very pointed from a commentary point of view about having juxtaposing the children from the concentration camp with the sort of military martial style of music. And, it's very powerful. I think my ignorance about that music is very stereotyped, right? I just have a very surface level sense of what the music would be, and I'm very curious to dig in more and to find where the dynamics are and how you get some of those other textures.
The military marching band or military brass bands are so much more than marching music, of course. It's actually any kind of music you write for them. You can write anything. You don't have to write marches. I didn't write marches, of course. I write soulful tunes for these instruments. In Denmark, and I know in America too, the musicians in the military bands are very skilled players, very good players. So they can make their instruments sing as in any other orchestra.
It must be fun for them to play something that's stylistically different as well.
Yeah, they love it because it challenges them in a different way, of course, to give them more soulful music, maybe to sing on their instrument.
That's incredible. So I guess, is the cadence of your life and your creative life at this point, like, do you work more during the summer festival season or work more in terms of gigging, or like, are you off that routine? Like, how does it work for you? Is part of your year composing and part of your year performing, or can you characterize it?
It's more or less as it always has been. When I'm not playing, I'm composing. When I'm not composing, I'm playing. Maybe I'm playing a little less than I used to when I was younger, because I'm not that much on the road. But that's not my choice. I think it's just as much a question about the market, that the whole live market is changing.
Yeah.
So it's not that easy to get as many concerts as I used to have. But I'm still playing. I have different bands. I play with Benjamin. I have a trio. I have a duo with a cello player. And so we're playing every month, all the time, actually. And I also play from time to time with my daughter, Marie, who is a soul singer, gospel singer, at Christmas time mostly. And so I'm busy as a musician. I'm busy as a composer. And I hope that I can keep it that way.
Me too. Thank you so much for making time to talk with me. It's a great honor, and I appreciate it so much. And thank you.
It's been a privilege.
Thank you so much, Anders Koppel. And as always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On. Spotlight On is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson. Editing and sound design is by Terry Grant. Our theme music, Q Burn's Abstract Message. The most important member of our team is you. Thank you for supporting our work. Please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and then visit us online at spotlightonpodcast.com. There you'll find our free episode archive, our online store, and a link to make a donation to support our work. Thanks for listening. Be safe and stay in touch.